appropriate for all dietary restrictions, because I know we will be in the Passover season. So we will have all your required needs, hopefully. And if you have a required need that is outside of what I might even imagine, let me know, and I can imagine it. Okay, so, but yeah, student slots, you can sign up for regular slots, but those student slots are really the way to go for that. And we will get you guys all plugged in, and that's great. Both of those are great ways to meet a lot of Master Gardeners. They are fun, kind of wild events, but they're fun. They're some of our biggest, most fun events each year. So, beyond that, I don't think I'm forgetting anything obvious, although that's how forgetting works. So, I'm going to introduce Sara Smith. Sara Smith is our reigning propagation queen. She is a really, really active volunteer over at Duke Gardens. She is on their propagation team as well. She's an absolute expert. She's co-chair of our propagation committee. She founded our propagation committee. So she is an absolute whiz, all things propagation. So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Let's wait to clap until you hear me. I'm Sara Smith, and I'm class of 2009, so there is Master Gardener life after this class, just so you guys know. I got interested in propagation when I realized that my need for plants far exceeded my budget for plants. And I decided I needed to learn how to make some for free. And so I started with propagation. I just love propagation because what it does is allows me to participate in a natural phenomenon that has been going on since the beginning of time. And plants have been, I can't propagate a plant, I have to confess. I can't propagate plants, but I can facilitate them propagating themselves. They've been doing this from way before we were ever on the earth. And they are so good at it that they have blanketed the entire earth. And they did this not by one method, they did it by two methods. They did it sexually, and they did it asexually or vegetatively. When the aquatic plant, I'm going to get ahead of myself, and I don't want to do that. So whenever I do something, I can teach you guys how to do it, but if you know the reason behind what you're doing, it just, for me, it helps me, when I understand why I'm doing something, it just helps me to do it. So that's what I'm going to get into with this. We're going to start with propagating with seed, and then I'm going to stop and have a question and answer session, and then we will get into propagating vegetatively, and then at the end of that we'll have a question and answer session. So we're going to do a little bit about the history of seed is where I'm going to start. So a long time ago, plants were in the ocean. They were aquatic. And they propagated themselves vegetatively and by spores. And these spores swam through the water and found each other and made a little zygote, I guess is what you call it. Well, that worked pretty well in the water. And then they took those propagation methods up on the shore, and spores did pretty well. They would land, the wind would blow them, they would land in a puddle of water or in some dew, and they would swim and find each other. However, on land, these little seedlings were sitting there out in the middle of the environment, and if it dried up, they were gone. So Mother Nature, she loves to experiment. She'll throw adaptations and mutations and all kinds of things out there, and what works continues, what doesn't, doesn't. So about 300 million years ago, we get a plant called a gymnosperm. And in the gymnosperm, instead of them throwing the spores out and then them trying to find each other, this plant held on to its little seed. It had the winds, it was still pollinated by wind, and if you look outside, North Carolina is famous for its yellow snowstorms in the spring. And that is the wind coming into the gymnosperms to pollinate those little seeds. Gymno means naked and sperm means seed. So this is a naked seed plant. It worked so well that it is continued today. Our modern day versions are cycads, conifers, and ginkgos. In other words, the cone then around 150 million years ago, something lovely came on, and that was the angiosperms. The angiosperms are the plants that have flowers and fruit. In other words, they have a covered seed. And that there are several advantages for the plant. This was such a good idea that around 350 plus species today are angiosperms. Around 90% of the plants today propagate themselves by seed. Many of them do both, vegetative and seed. Let's take just a minute to talk about what a seed is. Now, if you showed a non-gardener, one of those, a seed, and you said, what is this? They would take a look at it and they would say, well, it's round like a pebble. It feels kind of like wood. It is something that you eat. In other words, it's an inanimate object. And that is as far from the truth as you can get. That seed is a protective little packet that has a live embryo in it with enough food reserved to sustain that little seedling until it grows its true leaves and starts to photosynthesize. So, now that we know what a seed is, what makes it germinate? Germination most plant growth is dominated by hormones, or it's regulated by hormones, right from the very beginning with germination. And the hormones the first hormone, there's three of them. There's gibberellins, abscisic acid, and cytokinins. Gibberellins, when that seed coat, that protective seed coat is damaged, water and oxygen are allowed to get in there. That activates gibberellins. And when those are activated, there's this rapid cell growth and division. And then the gibberellins actually start the conversion of the starch that's in the seed into sugars, getting ready to make those little cotyledons that come out when the plant first comes out. Those little cotyledons have all the food that little seedling needs. But if you have a seed that's attached to the plant and the gibberellins start, so that seed germinates, what you get is a seedling that's sticking out in the middle of the air. And that's not going to do that seedling any good whatsoever. So abscisic acid says to the gibberellins, all right, you go ahead and do your thing, but let's hold on a little bit until that seed separates from the plant. Now, I learned a new word when I was researching this called vivipary. Do you know what it is? Vivipary, over time. All right, so you take a vegetable, and I'm a vegetable gardener, so you're going to hear me talk about vegetables a lot. You take a vegetable and you take it off like my winter squash, put it in your pantry, and you leave it for a certain amount of time. Well, over time, that abscisic acid starts to fade. So if any of you guys have ever sliced open a tomato, or with my winter squash, I sliced it open, lo and behold, there were seeds in there that had already started to germinate. And that's called vivipary. Well, once that abscisic acid starts to fade, cytokinins come in, and they are responsible for starting the growth of the little seedling. So now that we know that this is how seeds germinate, what can we do? What can we do to facilitate this happening? Well, when seeds germinate, they need certain things. Let me get to my thing here. First thing that they're going to need is temperature. Now, every seed has an optimum germination temperature range, which fortunately is about room temperature for us. There are some that need different ones, but most of the seeds do. One thing you'll hear me say is most of them do, but there are exceptions. Seeds, just like humans, have for the most part, and then but these are the exceptions. Not one thing doesn't cover everything, so you'll hear me say that. They also need light. Now, light, or they need no light, or they need either or. And so light is a little bit tricky. Most seeds don't care during the germination stage whether it's light or dark. Some seeds want light, and a good example of that are weeds. Weed seeds have to have light to germinate, and anybody that has cleared out a wonderful place for a new bed and 2 weeks later is going, what is this? Knows that seeds need light to, weeds need light to germinate. An example of a plant that needs dark to germinate would be, let's see, a swamp plant. And a swamp plant won't germinate unless it is in a place where it can get some light. No, that's wrong. That's a light one. Dark would be a desert plant. A desert plant. The desert plant seed goes down into the soil, into the sand, and at a microscopic level, at the level of the seed, there's a lot of light that penetrates sand, so it has to get down there where it's dark. When it gets that far down, it's protected, and it sits there until the monsoons come and drench enough rain down to hit that seed. And when that happens, the seed knows that there's enough rain to sustain it until it gets established. So that's just a little, oh, and a lot of our flower seeds, if you guys want to grow flowers from seeds, they need dark. So just keep that in mind and do a little research when you're doing your seeds. Moisture is about the trickiest thing that you have. We know that a seed will not germinate unless it has moisture. If a seed has more moisture than it takes to germinate it, then it's going to die. I told one of my good master gardener friends that okra needed to soak in water, and she soaked the okra seeds for 3 days, and guess what? Nothing germinated. Those requirements, light and moisture, and temperature, all three of those requirements are different from when they finish germinating, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. The next thing that they need is oxygen. Oxygen is what the seedling uses for energy. And I told you that when the gibberellins start, that they need oxygen in order to turn the starches into sugar. Oxygen provides the energy that these seedlings need in order to germinate, in order to break through their thing. So, here's where we come in. We know that all that is going on with the seed, but what we need to do is provide the environment for the seed. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to do pots. I'm going to take this with me. Now, plants are not fashionistas. They don't care what their pot looks like. You can use anything you want, but there are a few requirements for a pot. And the first requirement is that the pot has to be big enough so that the soil that you put in it will dry out in a reasonable amount of time. In other words, that seedling that comes up has to be able to consume all of the moisture in a day or two. Maybe a little bit longer, but a day or two. If it's tiny and it's in a great big cell, it's just going to be sitting in wet, and it will rot. And there's all kinds of diseases that can happen with that. If it's great big and you put it in a little tiny cell, what's going to happen is it's going to suck that water out in half a day, and you're going to just be sitting there constantly doing that. So the right pot, and I usually find that a size this big is pretty good for bigger seeds. A size smaller is pretty good for small seeds. Keep in mind that there's always exceptions. So, pull this off. Remember I was telling you about vivipary and my winter squash? This is a seed that I got out of it. Now I've got a winter squash seedling with 4 months to go. If I had this in something this small or something this small, it'd be dead in no time because I'm not going to be out there hovering over it and watering it. So just keep in mind that about your pot. Now the next thing that we need is, growing medium. When you are starting seeds outdoors, there are controls in the soil. There's all kinds of diseases and animals, and if you've got a thriving community in your soil, they're going to control, they're going to negate or naturalize them. In a little pot, in this controlled environment, there's none of those controls. So you have to make sure that everything that you do with seed starting and with cuttings is sterile, so you don't introduce diseases. They get in there, but we'll get to that. What I recommend is that you use a commercial seed starting mix. And the reason why I recommend that is because you know with a commercial seed starting mix that it's already sterile, number one. Number two, it has no fertilizer in it. When these seedlings first come out, that fertilizer, any fertilizer that's in there can burn those little seed roots, those tiny little roots, it'll burn them. So you don't want any fertilizer. Remember, they have all the food they need until they start to photosynthesize. It is also something that will hold moisture, but then also let it drain. So it's formulated for seed starting, and that's the reason why I recommend it. And I'm going to pass this around just so you can get a good look at the texture of it. You go ahead and feel that if you want. Now, get my plastic out here.
Sorry.
Yes.
In the store, is it called seed starting?
Seed starting mix.
It's literally called that.
Propagation.
All right, so here's trick number one that you guys are going to get, and it's probably, yeah,
Is it what? It's different from potting mix?
it is. Potting mix has got some bigger chunks in it, which is hard sometimes for those little seedlings, and it very often is not sterile and has fertilizer. So, yeah, it is. All right, my famous trick that I learned the hard way, I'm going to pass on to you guys so you don't have to learn the hard way. Moisten this soil before you put it in the pot.
Yes.
And I hear yes, because what happens if you put it in the pot, put your little seeds on it and cover your seeds and then try to moisten it, all of your seeds will wash right down to the back of the thing. So, I always moisten it first.
You moisten the seed starting mix. Okay.
And then you're going to press it very, very gently. All I'm doing is tamping it down. I'm not really pressing it hard. Just like this. Then you take your seed, and by the way, this is just for demonstration purposes. Peas like to be grown outside. Place the seed on there. Now you've got, your soil is moist, your seed is in there. You're going to cover it according to the package with bigger seeds. The rule of thumb is you put it the depth of the width of the seed. So the bigger it is, the deeper it is. Once you have that soil on the top right there, take your water and spritz the top of it with the water. That way you know that you're going to get good contact with the seed, and everything is going to be moist around it. And label it. Which is another thing, hint number 2 is make sure you label it. I always label one label for a 4-pack, and then I transfer them, and the first time I thought, well, I'll just put all 4 of them in a row, and one label will be just fine. Well, they grow at different sizes, so I was moving them around thinking, I don't know what they are. Tomato plants all look the same, no matter what the thing is. So, that's that. And then let's see, light. Okay. When your seedlings come out, their number one job is to get to their life source. And they are going to do that. And if they have to, they're going to elongate that stem and what happens when they elongate their stem in order to reach their light source is that stem becomes very weak. So in order to keep good, strong, healthy lights, you're going to put that light about 2 inches to 4 inches right above it. So you can either have a light that you can lower or raise, or you can have books under your plants and then pull them out as they get bigger. Whatever you need to do, just keep that light right about there. And if you're like me, I always put 2 seeds in the cell because I want to make sure that, I get one plant. You can take these 2 seedlings out and make 2 more seedlings. You will stunt their growth, but a lot of times that's okay. Or, and here we go, guys. Take the one that you like the one that you don't like, and snip it off. Don't throw it away, compost it, let its soul go into the ground. Yeah, exactly. Okay, moisture is the trickiest part of growing seeds. I just can't. Propagation is science and is also art. And you only get good at art when you practice, practice, practice. Highly recommend when you first start out with seed starting that you get a moisture meter. It will save you a whole lot of problems. I use moisture meters with my cuttings and also with my seedlings. You will eventually get to the point where you'll walk in and you'll say, the color of the soil has changed, I have to water. The color of the soil is too dark, I've got too much moisture. When you start your seeds, now I told you that what you have to do is just, oops, that's alcohol. Moisten them like that, and then you're going to put a dome. Now this is a high dome, but you've seen others that are just a couple of inches. That dome goes on there only while they're germinating. Temperature is important. You can put your seedlings or your seeds, they're not seedlings at this point. You put your seeds on a heat mat, or you don't have to have a heat mat. You can put them on top of the refrigerator or just in a nice warm place with the moisture dome on it, because you don't want that soil to dry out. Once they germinate, off the heat mat, dome comes off. Those seedlings and the germination need two different things. The seedlings will need light, a lower temperature, and no dome on the top of them. Germination, while they're germinating, they need all three of those things. So just keep that in mind. Okay, on to the next. I already went through that. I got ahead of myself. All right, let me go back here to this light. Some people, when they start their seeds, once they germinate and they have their little seedlings, they like to put it in a sunny window, and I've done this, and that works really well. But remember that they're going to be reaching for that light source, so they're going to grow sideways. So just give them a quarter turn every once in a while just to keep that evened out. And also remember that when you're starting these seedlings, it's going to be cold outside. Well, it used to be cold outside. I don't know if it is anymore. But it's going to be nice and warm during the daytime, but it's going to get cold in that window at night. So just pull them back a little bit at nighttime to keep them a little warm. Okay, on to the next thing. Labels and records. Be kind to your future self. Give them notes. I went for years being one of these people that, I don't have time to write things down. I'm out there doing the seeds. I don't want that. Well, I planted the same tomato that I didn't really like the taste, and it didn't do well in my garden. But every year I thought, I'm going to try that. I did that last year. If I had just written down, you don't like the taste of this tomato. Records can be just anything that you want. It can be just a notebook that you keep. It can be a spreadsheet. It can be a shoebox full of index cards. But your future self will really thank you if you just let them know what happened the year before. Okay. Now, there's one other stage before these tiny little beautiful seedlings can go from this nice, beautiful environment that's completely customized for them to outside, and that's called hardening off. But before I get to that, I want to go through a few troubleshooting things, what could go wrong, and how you can prevent or fix them, because that's always important. And believe me, when you're seed starting, things are going to go wrong. That's nature. So the first thing is poor germination. You've got all these seeds, you've done everything right, and nothing comes up. If you're like me, I will keep a packet of seeds for 5 years because I'm going to get my money out of that packet of seeds. So by the time the 5 years comes, it may be that they are just simply too old. It just depends on how you keep them, how they're stored. When you go back to moisture, there's two kinds of seeds. There's recalcitrant and there's orthodox seeds. Most of the seeds are orthodox seeds, which means that they can be dehydrated down to 10% of their moisture, and at that point they can be frozen. That's how these big seed banks at Svalbard keep those seeds. They dehydrate them to 10% moisture and then they freeze them. Keep that in mind when you're storing your seeds. The best way to store them is in paper at a low temperature, not at freezing temperature, but you know, if you can put them in a cool room or in a refrigerator, they store better. Most seeds store better. Recalcitrant seeds can't dry out. And we have a really good example here in North Carolina of pawpaws. If you harvest the pawpaw seeds, they have to be wrapped up in a moist paper towel, put into plastic, and then stuck in the refrigerator, and they can last 2 years, up to 2 years that way. They can't dry out. Consequently, these large seed banks don't have recalcitrant seeds. That's just a fun fact for you. Another thing that can cause poor germination is the seeds, when they're no longer viable, and a good way for you to figure that out is there's a simple test. You take a moist paper towel, put 10 of your seeds on it and wrap it up, and then slip it into a Ziploc bag and leave it out. For the number of days that it says on the packet it's supposed to germinate, take them out and open it up, and if you count and there is 75% of the seeds that have germinated, then you can say, yes, these seeds are viable. 50%, I would say, we're getting there, we're gonna put 3 seeds in every cell instead of just my normal 2. If it's less than 50% that have germinated, go ahead and compost the seeds and start over again. So that's just an easy test that you can do for that. Now, they may have needed a special treatment. If you recall, like let's say an oak is going to drop its acorns in the fall, right? That oak doesn't want their seedlings to germinate in the winter, in the middle of the winter. What they want is for the seedlings to germinate in the spring. So this is called stratification. We can do that for the seeds. We can provide that for the seeds that need to be stratified simply by putting them in the refrigerator for a certain amount of time and then taking them out. I have a plant called a wintergreen. I think you guys probably know that. It's the same thing that they do gum out of it. And what you have to do with that is you have to soak it, you have to plant it, you have to cover it up and put foil over it and stick it in the refrigerator, and then you have to pull it out, expose it to light, and put it on a heat mat. I have a whole pot full of them. I'm happy to say thank you. So that's one of them. That's called stratification. Now the other one, a lot of seeds have fruit around them, and they have fruit because they are attracting birds and animals, and they don't want this is part of their distribution thing. They want those birds and animals to take those seeds. So this is called scarification, because what happens is the seeds go through the gut of the animal or the bird, and the stomach acids break down that heavy seed coat of theirs, and then they're deposited with a nice little packet of fertilizer, and that's where they want to grow. We can do the same, not the fertilizer, but we can do the same thing. What we can do is, and a lot of times it's as easy as just rubbing the seed on a piece of sandpaper to scratch that seed coat. I have my favorite plant, one of my favorite plants, I have several of them, but is called Roselle, and Roselle wants to have a little nick taken out of the seed. So I just take the tips of my scissors and just nip that little seed before I soak it in the water. If you've tried that, then and everything is fine, yeah.
Yeah, question about scarification. So I've been told that if you were saving your own tomato seeds, that you should in fact set it with some tomato pulp and let it essentially rot on a windowsill for
Yeah,
a few days.
I've seen that, yeah.
So I guess we would call that chemical scarification, and
It is,
that
but it has to lot of the seeds have germination inhibitors that has to wear off, and leaving them in that to ferment, that
Yeah.
fermentation process is what it is. Ferments that germination inhibitor off of it, but you can also just leave the seeds in the tomato for a long period of time, and it'll take care of it.
Okay.
I've done it both ways.
So that would be a form of scarification, or is that something else?
Yeah, I think it would. Yeah. And it's one of the things. Soaking is another thing, a pre-soak, and it takes away the germination inhibitor, that pre-soak, and it also allows the water to get into the seeds that don't. Now, as far as pre-soaking the seeds, I go back to my okra that my master gardener, who will remain nameless, soaked for three days. Okra and my roselle likes to be soaked for only 4 hours. So I get up in the morning, I put them in water, I go out and plant the rest of my seeds, come in and have lunch, and then I plant them. And things like beans and corn, they don't want a full soak. They want to just be wrapped up in a moist paper towel and left for overnight and then planted the next day. So you have to know your seed. You have to do a little bit of research on your seed. If it's none of the scarification, stratification, and you have viable seed, then you can start looking at your environment, your moisture, your light, your moisture and light probably are the two, and the temperature, to see if they're, and then start over again, because gardening is an experiment. We learn by our mistakes.
I wanted to ask about the setup that you had that was under, it looked like grow lights. Is there a formula for how long you leave those on?
There is. Well, no, there's not a formula. There is a best practice, I guess you would call it. Plants can actually go under lights for 24 hours. The marijuana industry is doing a great job with this. But what happens, there is an indication, there is some research that says that there are certain things that happen when plants are in the dark. So the recommendation is 16 hours on, 4 hours off, to give them that little ability to do whatever they do in the dark. I'm not going to ask. Okay,
Wait, do you do 16 on, 8 off?
16 on, 8 off, yeah. All right, so here you have, you've done your seeds, you've done everything right, your little seedlings are up, they're having a marvelous time, and you walk in, isn't that the saddest thing you ever saw? This goes back to moisture. This is called damping off. It is a fungus that grows in moist soil. So, and this is sterile soil that I planted this in. Where it comes from, I have no idea, but I left my soil too moist. A trick that you can do to keep this from happening is when you have your seedlings in a tray, water from the bottom and keep that top soil dry. That will help keep that from happening. That fungus will get into the vascular system of the plant. It clogs the vascular system up, and it looks just like somebody came along and pinched it. That's what it looks like.
When you have seeds, do you also do bottom up and just let them soak a little while?
Once you get them put together, they're not gonna, her question was, do we water from the bottom of them up when we're germinating? No, once you have them together, you can, and put the dome on it. That's what that dome is for, is to keep them from drying out. Yeah, don't water them until they start getting into seedlings. Okay, discolored leaves. This is reversible, but you have to get on it pretty fast. And there are a couple of things that will cause this. Oops. The first one is moisture. It's too moist. It'll cause these what they call water spots, I guess. But the second thing is that it got way too close to the lights. This is actually one of my husband's plants, not mine, that he allowed to grow up into the light fixture, and it just got too much light, and it got sunburned. And the third one is fertilizer. So this is one of the reasons why we say that you don't fertilize your seedlings until they get their second set of true leaves. When they get the second set of true leaves, you can use a liquid organic fertilizer and half the strength. And a lot of your better fertilizers will have those instructions on how to feed seedlings on them, but just a good practice is half the strength. Leggy seedlings, oh, this is one that was on the outside of the crowd and it was doing its best to get its share of the sun, of the light getting in there. Overcrowding is one of the ways that causes leggy seedlings. Having your light too far above the plant will have it too. It does cause the stem to be weak, and there's a couple of things that you can do. One of them is that you can exercise it. And I don't mean take it out and jog around with it, but you know, when you're going by, you just kind of rub your hand over it and just give it a little bit of movement. That helps to strengthen the stem. Or if you have a fan and you can just have the fan kind of blowing in directly just so the air in your room is moving, that will help too. And these are the bane of my life. I don't know who sends out the invitation, but they always show up for the party. And that little fan moving will also help with this. This is called fungus gnats. And the reason, remember the damping off where the fungus was in the moist soil? Well, the adults of the fungus gnat are not the problem. They're the pest, but they're not the problem. What they do is they lay their eggs in the first quarter inch of moist soil, and it's their larva that eats the fungus that's in the moist soil, but they also eat the tender roots and the stems of your seedlings. Two things that help is water from the bottom, keep the topsoil moist, and then what I found really helpful was to put perlite, as you can tell on this, put perlite on the top of your seedlings. That makes a nice little barrier so that those adults can't get down in there and lay their eggs. Now some people use yellow sticky tape, and you can if you want to. I found that I got trapped more than the fungus flies, so I don't use that.
Do you put the perlite on all of your
I do.
trays,
Mhm.
regardless of what it is?
Yes. All right, so now you've gotten to the point where you're absolutely successful. Yes.
I know you can't recommend the light, but when looking for starting lights, what kinds of things should we look for?
You can use just fluorescent lights. There are some lights that are plant lights that have a larger spectrum. You don't want to use incandescent lights. They get way too hot. If you put an incandescent light, you're just going to burn them up. What else? Is there a specific?
So the interesting thing is that the lights you use for starting seedlings are actually less exact than what you would use for like getting a plant to flower.
Yeah.
So they'll take almost anything as long as it's strong enough. The LEDs at this point are getting really inexpensive and they have a really long life on them, to the point where I would say if you can spring for LED plant lights, they are not terribly expensive. Off season, like right now is one of the most expensive time of the year to buy lights, because everybody's buying lights. But I know typically if I was buying lights, even like 4 foot wide, which will handle 2 flats, November, December, I could buy a 4 foot LED 3 years ago, so who knows now, for $60, and they'll last 10 years, right? So I think you're under $100 for a light that's going to last you for as long as you want to use that thing, right? So
Yeah. And don't be intimidated by the fact that you don't have a place to set up a grow light.
you'll find a spot.
Miss Ashley has them under her table.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool.
Just, a word of caution from personal experiences, I switched from some older fluorescent lights to some very inexpensive LED
Yeah.
lights that were definitely designed for the cannabis industry.
Yeah.
And the very first thing I did was completely burn up my seedlings because those LED lights were so much stronger than my old fluorescent bulbs.
Yeah, be careful with that.
So be careful.
Sometimes the LEDs, because cannabis is driving this at this point, it's really impressive. They'll have almost even settings. So I have a light that has 4 bulbs in it, like 4 LED rails. I can turn on 2 and not turn on the other 2. And also just kind of play with it, watch it and see if your plants are burning, just like what you're saying. And the other thing I would say is, if you're just trying to get germination, you do not need the red lights. Red lights are to promote flowering, and they're ugly, and you don't want them in your house, right? Just buy the white
Yeah.
lights.
They hurt your eyes too.
Yeah, the red lights are very unpleasant.
Okay, so hardening off. This is the last stage, and this also takes a little bit of practice. The way I do it is yeah, I got it. I take them out on a nice calm day. If it's cloudy, that's even better, but if it's not, I put them in the shade for about an hour the first day. It's just like, here it is, and just introduce them. Then over the course of the next 2 weeks, I take them out and leave them out for longer. Around day 3 or 4, I start introducing them to dappled sunlight, and then a little bit of maybe morning sunlight, and then a little bit more. It's a gradual process. You want them to grow into that outside environment. At the end of 2 weeks, you're good to go. They're ready to go out. As long as it is after April 15th, it'll be fine. Unless you're like me and I put them out early and then I'm out there covering them up every time. One of the things, you'll look here, this is a wagon. Now this was perfect because I could put all my seedlings in there, row them out, row them back in. Miss Tishy over here, Bev Tishy, put all of her seedlings in her husband's pickup truck that stays in the garage, and then she'd roll the pickup truck out.
Until her husband wants to use the truck.
Exactly. Okay, so that's all we have for seedlings. Are there any questions that you would like to ask? Yeah.
When you're talking about temperature, are you talking about soil temperature or air temperature? Because
Soil
it's-
temperature.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, so, because it, I mean, if your house is, 71 degrees and it says, seed packet says 65 to 75,
Yeah,
that's not the air temperature, that's the soil temperature.
that's the soil temperature. Yeah, but inside a house, the soil will be the temperature of the air. It'll acclimate to that.
Hmm.
So you need to put a heat mat on it and then take them off. Did you have a question?
When do you take the dome off? Like 50% germination or like 100% or just,
What, I'm sorry.
when do you take the moisture dome off?
Oh, when do you take the moisture dome off? As soon as they come up out of the ground.
Like how many? Like, they all.
Oh, yeah, I understand what you mean. No, I do it as soon as I see the first ones.
Oh.
Off they come.
If you buy seeds, how do you, so you have that cute little 75%, 50%, less than 50%, but is there a expiration date on the seed?
There is, there
Okay.
is. Let me see if I can find the one on here. Sometimes you really have to look at them.
Yeah.
They'll always have a packed by date.
Yeah, they'll always,
They'll like have like the year they're packed for.
Mhm.
Second year I try it. Third year I'm like, fourth year
Yeah.
life's too short.
I can't see them.
Okay.
I got new eyes, I can't
So
see
if
them.
you buy seeds and you're not gonna grow maybe that year, should you just put them in the freezer? Or
I would keep them in the refrigerator, or if you have a cool place in your
Yeah.
house, just make sure that you put them in with paper,
Okay.
and not plastic, and keep them dry. And you know those little desiccants that we get in our pill bottles and everything? You can just throw a couple of packets of those in, but if you don't have those, you can take powdered milk and put it in a paper towel, and that makes a good desiccant. And you can keep them that way.
Yeah, the crisper drawer of your fridge is actually basically ideally suited for
Yeah.
seed storage.
Yeah, because it's low moisture.
Yeah.
Question. Usually you put the perlite on top to prevent damping off the fungus. When do you put that on?
As soon as, when they get up, as soon as they come up out of the ground, I start putting it on. I don't do it when they're germinating, but once they're up, then put it on there. Yeah.
So when you're hardening off, so say they live in the garage, are they gonna ateliate or whatever, are they gonna like stretch towards the sun?
No, they don't do that. The sun is so much brighter than any of our artificial lights that they're fine with the sun. Yeah.
Okay. Cause that's like, I'm like they're on my porch, and then I put in the back of the grow lights, and I'm just trying to figure out sort of.
That's the whole beauty of gardening.
And the hardening off process it doesn't take enough days to have that effect.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, great. Because you're doing it in under a week, so any of that legginess, it's too short for that to happen. Okay.
yeah. Any other questions before we move on to vegetative? Now, vegetative, like I said in the beginning, vegetative propagation has been going on since they were in the water, since they were aquatic, before they even came out. And when they came out, they thought, this is perfect, we can do this. nature, like I said, throws out all these mutations and adaptations and what sticks they do. Vegetative propagation is alive and well today. Just about every plant that I know of, and there are always exceptions, but just about every plant that I know of can be propagated vegetatively, and a lot of plants do this on their very own without any help from us at all, because it's so successful. Advantages to the plants. The first thing is that it's self-reliance. They don't have to have a sexual counterpart. They don't even have to have pollinators in order to do this. The second one is cloning. If their plant is successful in its environment, it's doing just perfectly, if it vegetatively propagates itself, there's an exact clone of this highly successful plant. They can also protect their progeny because a lot of vegetative propagation happens while the plant is still attached to the parent. If you look up here, that little colocasia up there, I was climbing under one of my camellias, cleaning it out. I was cleaning it out under my camellia. I found this plant and I went, I did not plant a colocasia under this camellia. So I followed that stem right there back, and lo and behold, there was the colocasia, and what had happened was one of those big leaves has fallen down, and right where the petiole attaches to the leaf, this new plant grew. That parent plant was feeding that baby and keeping it alive until it got established. Plants use vegetative propagation to move. And I know that a lot of people don't think plants move, but yes, indeed they do move. And they move vegetatively as well as with seeds. Just like this little plant right here, they use vegetative propagation to move. A good example is Salix fragilis, and that is, the common name for that is a crack willow. And it's called a crack willow because that's the sound of its branches breaking when the wind blows. Its branches are really, what do you call it? Brittle. They're really brittle, and they break off when the wind blows. And these trees grow near rivers and lakes, so the branches fall in the water, they float downstream until they get mired in the mud, and here's another tree. That plant has moved that far. How do they do this wonderful thing? Vegetatively propagate themselves. They do it with something that's called meristematic tissue. All plants grow their entire life. They don't get 5 feet tall and stop growing. They continue to grow, not like us. And they do this because they have these undifferentiated cells that can be any one of the parts. They can be a leaf, they can be a stem, they can be a root. What determines whether they're a leaf, a stem, or a root is their environment. And remember, we can manipulate the environment, so just keep that in mind. Now, these little packets of undifferentiated cells are in certain areas. One of them is an apical meristem, which is at the tips of the branches and at the tips of the roots. And if anybody has ever had a hanging plant and the root has grown out through the drain hole and then all of a sudden you have another plant on there, that's because that root that was in a moist, dark environment all of a sudden found itself in a light, dry environment. So those apical cells on the tip of its root said, don't be a root anymore, be a stem. And that's how that works. The other one is a lateral meristematic tissue, and this is tissue that is around the vascular system in what we call the cambium layer. It's what is responsible for putting on girth. And then the other one is interclary, and this is where the little bulge where the leaves are. Let's see if I can do this. Right there. That's an interclary tissue. That is like, a lot of you guys know if you take off a leaf, then a stem will grow. There's different things that trigger these different growths, which is where we come in. All right, so we can do this, but I mean, we're humans. We don't do anything unless it's an advantage to us, right? So one of the advantages is that we get identical plants. If I go over to Bev's house and she's got a plant there that I absolutely love and I like that color and I want that shape and that form, I can use vegetative propagation with her permission. Do not take cuttings. Do not take cuttings without permission. With her permission, I can vegetatively have that plant. We also get larger plants quicker. If I take a cutting or any other kind of vegetative propagation, the new plant keeps the maturity of the parent plant that it came from. It's not like seedlings. So if I'm trying to grow a Edgeworthia from a seed, it's going to take several years before I get blossoms. If I take a cutting of an Edgeworthia, I'm going to get blossoms in about 2 years. It takes about 2 years, doesn't it? I don't know, some of mine bloom right away. Sometimes it's the only way to get a plant, and the examples that I have here are, if you take a gala apple, it has 5 seeds in it, you plant those 5 seeds, in about 10 years you're going to have 5 apples that are nothing like a gala. And they're nothing like each other either. The 5 seeds that come out of the same apple will give you 5 different apples. The only way to get a gala is to propagate it vegetatively. And the same goes for oranges and seedless grapes. Now, the vegetative propagation is, there are 5 main categories, but under each one of these categories are lots of subcategories. And this class isn't long enough for me to go into all of them. Grafting is a class of its own. We had that class in February, and we'll have it again next February. And then tissue culture is not really available to the homeowner. It's done under sterile conditions in the laboratory. So I'm going to go over the first 3. I'm going to go over division, layering, and cuttings. And let's get started with divisions. I need my notes for these. Because I don't want to miss anything. Okay, division is used with clumping plants like daisies, bulbs, and grasses. It doesn't hurt the plant. Remember that plants evolved with herbivores. They evolved to be eaten. So this is actually an adaptation so that when an herbivore comes along and grabs a hold of a chunk of grass and pulls it out, it's not killing the plant, it's only taking part of it. It is the most labor intensive, but it yields mature plants instantly. When I first started at Duke Gardens, I knew nothing. I was just like Bambi. And Jason came in and he handed me this huge butcher knife and this pot that was so big and grown that it was splitting open its pot. And he said, here, divide this into 4 plants. And I took a look at that knife and a look at that plant, and I thought, oh, my propagation career is over. I'm gonna mutilate this plant, and they're gonna fire me. My friend said, just go ahead and do it. So I did. I hacked that thing into 4 pieces, and I mean I hacked it into 4 pieces. Put it into pots. A week later, I went into the greenhouse. Here's 4 perfectly formed, mature plants. So that's what you get with division. You don't have to wait. There's no waiting. You get instant mature plants with it. Of course, it takes a lot to hack a plant like that. So let's talk a little bit about when you want to divide. There's early spring, and what you want to divide in early spring are plants that don't bloom in the early spring. You can start dividing plants from the time they first appear on the top of the soil till they get about 3 inches. Late spring, early summer, divide the plants that bloom in early spring. That's a no-brainer. Then in the summertime, we can divide oriental poppies, iris, and peonies. And what you want to do is you want to divide them after they've bloomed and when their leaves start to fade away. That's the best time to do that. Now here in North Carolina, we're really lucky because in the fall, we can divide anything. But if you want to divide something in the fall, the best practice would be to water it really well the day before, and then the next day, if it's a cloudy day, you can go ahead and divide it. If it's not, then wait until evening and then divide it in the evening. And if you can't plant it right away, just wrap it up in some damp towels and let it sit in those damp towels until you can divide it. A little bit about what. This first plant over here is called a sucker, and I know everybody here that grows any plants at all knows what a sucker is. They do it naturally. This is what plants do. For us, all we have to do is go out there and cut off the sucker, and we've got a new plant. Now, if you're lucky, they've already gone ahead and rooted, and you can just pot them up. If they haven't, if you dig a sucker and it hasn't rooted, try and take just a little bit of the mature root with it, and then you're going to have to treat it a little bit like a cutting. You're going to have to baby it a little bit, make sure it stays moist, doesn't dry out, that kind of thing. Offshoots, stolons, and rhizomes. Stolons and rhizomes are actually lateral growing or horizontal growing branches, stems. And they can be really long, like a spider plant or a strawberry plant, or they can be so short that they look like they're part of the plant. With stolons that are really long, the best way to do it is just to pin them down into some soil and wait until they do root and then cut them off from the parent plant and you have it. I mean, it's pretty easy to do. With the little tiny ones like that, they usually won't root, so you just have to very carefully remove them from the parent plant, pin them to the ground, and then just keep them moist until they do root. Now these multi-plant clumps like this looks like one big plant, but every single one of those stems is a stem and roots. They're all connected, but they're stems and roots. And I've got an example here. And this is a lot of your grasses will grow like this. So here we go. Look at that. They're two little plants. And that's the reason why if an herbivore comes along and they takes this clump off, it's not killing the plant. The plant still is there. I'm going to go ahead and pass that around for you. Okay. Other things that can be divided are bulbs, corms, tubers, and rhizomes. And the easiest way to divide a bulb is to just cut it in half. There are some fancier ways to divide a bulb, but that's another class. I'll just put out that teaser because I'm thinking. Let's see. All right.
You say cut the bulb like right in half.
Cut in half. Because if you, all right, so you open up an onion, if you cut an onion in half, that onion, every ring on an onion, every layer on an onion is the base of the leaf. And all of those leaves, the stem is this big. On the bottom of the onion, where the roots come out, they come out of the stem. So when you cut that onion in half, or that bulb in half, what you're doing is you're cutting the stem along with some roots and growth. Here is one. This is a green onion, and it's already divided itself. That's what they do. That's what bulbs do naturally, is they grow up 1 year, they flower, and then they divide themselves. Have any of you guys tried to grow tulips more than 1 year? Yeah, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. That's the reason, because they stay attached to each other. The bulb doesn't fully grow. So the best way that you actually help them when you divide them and move them, because then they get their own roots and they have room to grow.
So what time of the year do you take the tulips?
You wanna do that after they have finished blooming and when their leaves are starting to deteriorate.
Actually, you can take one of those bulbs and longitudinally cut it in half.
You can, yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Go back. This is not working out for me. Okay, there we go. All right, tubers. Tubers, let's see. Yes, tubers. Tubers, my favorites. Here we go with the vegetables again. Potatoes are actually an underground stem, and this is part of the stem. And each one of these eyes is a growing point, and with the potato, they're all over the stem. So what you can do is you can cut this potato so that it has 2 eyes each. Let it sit for about 2 days, 2 or 3 days, so that that cut calluses over before you put it into the ground, and you will get new potato plants. Sweet potato, which is, by the way, not related to a potato, is an underground root. It is part of a root. It only has growing eyes on one end. This is the part that was attached to the plant, I believe, and it will have roots coming out of this end. It'll have growing stems coming out of this one. And with these, the best way to do this is to lay them horizontally in a tray of soil, cover them with soil, start watering them. You'll see all this new growth that comes out of this end of it. Snap those off and root them in water, then put them outside. And if you have a moist area, you can snap them off, put them in the soil outside, and they will root as long as you keep them moist. This is a morning glory, so they're really happy to grow. And then the last thing is rhizomes, and rhizomes are a stem that grows horizontally on the earth, and this is an iris. And this is I've got a good example here of how the iris, you can see this is the main iris, and then it has divided itself off onto one of these little ones. Now, and you can also see that this iris, the roots start on the bottom of the iris. So when you're transferring these irises, when you plant them, make sure that the rhizome stays right on the surface. Don't bury these. They don't want to be buried. They want just the roots buried. Pass those around so you can take a look at it. Oh, one other thing. Now this is called a colocasia. Not a colocasia. Crocosma. And it is a corm, and corms are a little bit different. They don't divide like bulbs divide. What they do is they build another corm or several cormels on the bottom, and you can just take those cormels off and start yourself another plant. So this little one right here, when you see it up close, you can see that this is the first cormel, or this is the first cormel, and it's starting to create a new cormel right there on the bottom. And here's one they're still attached. I just think these are so cool. All you have to do is take these off and you can plant them and you'll have a new plant. It'll take a couple of years before they bloom, but yeah, these are easy to do.
What were the
They're corms.
I know, but what was it?
Oh, crocosma. Any questions about bulbs or corms or anything? Yeah.
If you're trying to grow ginger or turmeric, do you do the same thing like you do with the tuber?
Yeah, you'll cut those pieces and you want to make sure that they have some growing points on them. And then, but they do get buried. They're not like the iris. They do like to get buried. Not far. Now layering is, I call layering the ancient of the ancient. And this is something that all plants will do. What layering uses is, what we were trying to do is we're trying to make roots come out of a stem. So we're using lateral and intercalary meristematic tissue to do this. There are 7 different types of layering. This is when I say that, yes, there's only 3 things that I'm gonna talk about, but there's lots and lots of subcategories under it. And the first one is natural layering, and this is what the plant does all by itself. All we do is go out there and whack off a piece of it, and we've got another plant. It's easy enough to do, but we can also, this simple layering is what happens when humans get involved in this natural process. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to find a limb that touches the ground and mark the limb and the ground where they touch. Then dig out a shallow bowl of soil right there where the stem is gonna touch the ground. Take that soil and mix it in with some compost or some potting soil just to keep that spot really friable. Take your branch and wound the bottom of the branch and then put some rooting hormone on it. If you do this in early spring, and you're doing it with a new branch, you don't really need rooting hormone. But most of the time, you're gonna be doing it with a branch that's older than a year. So little rooting hormone just helps it. And then it's basically as easy as just clunking a rock on top of it if you want to. In this picture, I drew this picture so you can see that I'm a better gardener than I am an artist, but it gets the point. I like to stake it down, and I just use a landscape cloth staple, stake it down into the ground. And then if it's a really pliable branch, then I go ahead and put a stake in there just to get that growth to go up. That's not necessary. If it's growing straight out, when you cut it off, you can just reorient it when you plant it. Tip layering is something that the rubus family takes advantage of. This is your blackberries and your raspberries, your cane fruit. And in the wild, blackberries will grow right on the edge of a forest, between a forest and a sunny spot. They maintain that position by the first year they fruit on their canes, then those canes go towards the sun. They hit the ground and they actually grow 3 to 5 inches into the ground. So they're going from a light, dry environment into a moist, dark environment. When they go into that ground, those apical meristems say, oh, we need to grow a new stem and roots. And so if you want to propagate your blackberries and your raspberries, all you have to do is take one of those canes that's already fruited, get it to grow down into a 1-gallon pot of potting soil, and let it go. Leave it alone. Next year, you'll have a new plant. Serpentine is what we do with vines, and you can get a lot of plants off a single vine with that. This is how vines naturally do. Anytime we're using intercalary meristematic tissue, we're using the stems where the leaves come out. You just pin them down into a pot, and this is like one vine, you can get several plants out of that. I have a native honeysuckle. It's Laniceros canadensis, I believe. I tried growing it from seed. I tried softwood cuttings, semi-hardwood cuttings, hardwood cuttings. I could not get that plant to do. So I finally just used this serpentine. I mean, why do the obvious when you can do all the other stuff that doesn't work first? And we had plenty of them for the plant sale because every single one of them took. Now, I threw this in. This isn't something that you and I are probably going to do, but it was so interesting to me. This is usually done in the nursery trade when the nurseryman wants to increase his stock of rootstock, his inventory of rootstock. But it's a good example of what happens with vegetative. They take a whole tree, dig a trench, put it in there, and cover it up. And when they do that, the branches, of course, go towards the sun. And everywhere that they turn stresses that branch. So they go from light, dry, into dark, damp, and they grow roots. Everywhere those branches turn, it stresses right there, and they grow roots. Next year, they dig their plant up, they cut off the branches, and they've got a whole lot more inventory. We can do something similar. In the very early spring, if you have a tree, a small tree, or a bush that you want to propagate, you can cut it off, leaving about maybe this much with some nodes on it, with some leaf nodes on it. As it comes out of dormancy, it's going to sprout several branches. And I know everybody that has cut off a tree knows that that's what happened. It does several branches. And what you can do is start mounting soil up around it and until it gets to about a foot. Leave it alone. In the fall, usually check to see if it's rooted in. And if it is, you just uncover it, take the hose off the soil, and you've got several new plants. Another version we can do if we don't have this, and I'm going to bring this guy out, my big guy. So here I have a potted plant. I don't necessarily want this potted plant. This is a apple rootstock that has just been living because I'm a kind person. But I want some more apple rootstock, and I want to do it easily because I don't want to mess with it. This isn't something that I really want to pay much attention to. So what I'm going to do is I cut the bottom out of a 1 gallon pot. And I am going to take this, oh wait a minute, a little bit of preparation first. Strip off these leaves on the bottom. And I'm just pulling them down. I'm not doing anything fancy with that.
When you say apple stock, that's an apple tree?
Apple rootstock, yeah. It's an apple tree, but it's not one that's desirable. But it has some, she asked me about the apple rootstock. Apples always grow on a rootstock, and that's where grafting comes in. That's part of the grafting. We graft the desired variety onto this because this one has protection from root nematodes, and sometimes if you want just a small apple tree, this is a dwarfing rootstock, so anything that I put on this will be a dwarf apple tree. All right, once I do that, I'm going to take my razor blade and I'm going to give it a little bit of a wound. Now, I'm not going to use rooting hormone on this because of the size of the branches. They're fairly new. They were last year's growth. And because of the time of year it is. Usually, the best time to do this is just as they're coming out of dormancy.
How far down are you moving it?
That far from the ground, yeah. I'm just going to give it just a tiny little bit of a wound. And what I'm doing is I'm exposing that cambium layer where the intercalary, the lateral meristematic tissue is. Now I'm going to take my collar. I did this when I had one gardenia that I really wanted, and I only had one, and I didn't want to trust it to cuttings. So I did this, and I was very successful. I got 11 of those things. All right, I can't get it all the way down because of this one, and I want to save that one, but you get the idea. Fill it up with soil, leave it alone, water it just like you would normally during the year, and at the end of the year, test it to see if there's any roots in it. And if there is, you just pull this collar off, wash off all the soil, cut off the branches, you've got brand new plants. And they will be this big. That's the beauty of this thing. There's no muss, no fuss. Just easy, easy. I have some confidence. All right, so the most, yes?
Just a quick question about the blooming. Is that just exposed to cambium layer, or is it also like stimulating hormones in the plant that produce roots?
It is stimulating those meristematic tissue, that undifferentiated tissue. That the wound opens up that contact with that cambium layer. Then when you change its environment, that's what stimulates it to grow roots rather than stems or leaves.
All right, so it's not just a kind of a mechanical issue of exposing that layer, it
Yeah.
is stimulating.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you put, what kind of soil, just normal potting soil?
Potting soil. Air layering is probably the most exotic of all the layering techniques. It is ancient. I mean, we have a 7000 BC Chinese writing that describes wrapping a sticky ball of mud around a wounded stem. So it's been going on for a long time. A lot of people can use it for different things. I was doing this at Duke Gardens. I was doing a demo on air layering at Duke Gardens, and this man came in and he had this bush that had already rooted, and he handed it to me and he said, "Here, you can have this for your demo." And I said, "Well, thanks, I didn't know who he was." Jason walks in, and you guys don't know Jason, but Jason Holmes is my mentor, and he started me on propagation. He walked in and he said, "That's that guy." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "This guy is air layering trees all over Durham, and air layered one of our old Japanese maples in the garden." I said, "You're kidding." And I said, "No." And he just walked in just as bold as brass and laid it down. I couldn't believe it. Okay, so air layering, what you want to do is you want to choose a stem that is at least as big as a pencil. And I am going to go up here, so I'm going to see if I can put this on the ground. Can y'all see that? Is it a little too far down? All right, we can deal with that.
Can you only use woody stems for this?
Yeah, because they have to be,
That big.
yeah. All right, we'll just go over here. And the first thing that I'm going to do then is find my clippers.
Did you see what time?
And I'm going to cut off everything that is around here. The one thing I learned from my experience, you want to get as far up on the stem, because when this thing roots, where that root ball is, it's going to have all that plant to keep. And so that root ball is going to be really small. So if I put that root ball down here like this and had all of this for that root ball to take care of, it's not going to have a very good chance. So that's the reason why I'm getting a little far up on this stem. Now the next thing that you want to do, and this is that we're using the intercalary meristematic tissue. So the lateral meristematic tissue is the tissue that is around the branch. And this is good for things like that don't bend down, like camellias don't bend their branches down, so we can't do layering that way. It is also good for like a rubber plant or a fiddle leaf fig. With air layering, you have to understand one thing though. You have to understand between a dicot and a monocot. Now a dicot is the little plants that when they come out they have two dicotyledons, and a monocot is in the grass family, like corn, rubber plant, fiddle leaf fig are all monocots because they have one that comes out. And the way we do the air layering is going to depend on the vascular system. Remember, we're doing lateral meristematic tissue. In a monocot, those vascular bundles are all through the stem. This is a cross section of the stem. With a dicot, the vascular bundles are around the outside of the stem. So with a monocot, what you're going to do is you're going to cut about a angled cut about a third of the way into the stem, and that will expose most of their vascular bundles. And then just stick a toothpick in there to keep it open. Because if you don't keep it open, the job of those undifferentiated cells is to knit everything back together again, and they will knit themselves back together. With a dicot, that's when you're going to wound all the way around the stem, because remember the vascular system bundles is all the way around the stem. So here we go. And I should have brought my glasses, and I didn't. Use a very sharp knife. And when you're doing any of this work, and I didn't say anything about it, I brought my alcohol, but always make sure that your equipment is sterilized. We're actually cutting into the vascular system of this plant. We don't want to introduce any diseases into it. Applewood is really hard wood. Does anybody know that? I I'm going to also take it and just scrape down like this. I want to make sure that there is no connection here. All right, there's that. Then the next thing that I'm going to do, where did it go? I am going to use rooting hormone. Whenever you use rooting hormone, don't dip into the container. Hormone grows things. Always take it out. You can, when you get finished with it, don't put it back in. Just compost it, throw it out in your yard, do whatever you want to with it. Just don't contaminate your supply. I use a little brush like this to do it. I just put that on there, and then I'm just going to brush, brush, brush.
It doesn't have to be moist first?
Nope.
Okay.
So, can you, rooting hormone is powder sometimes?
It can be powdered. It's powder. It comes in several different, powder, gel, liquid, and then each one of them has their own advantages. I find
You dissolve the powder in water? And
no.
use that?
You put it on dry.
You put it on water?
Yeah. The next thing that we need is, remember, we're taking this from light and dry to dark and moist. So what we use for dark and moist is, I use sphagnum moss, and I've soaked this overnight so it's nice and wet. I don't know if you can see this, but see, it's wet. The art of doing the air layering is trying to get this ball of wet ball mass onto the stem. So, I use a little piece of plastic, and I have learned that if I crumple it ahead of time, I put just a piece of tape on here to get it to gather. It works a little bit better. Now, I will tell you that Bryce Lane, I don't know if you guys know him, but he's one of the gurus in the system. When he did this, the first time I saw him do this on a video, they cut the video off when he was trying to do this, and then cut it back on. Okay, so here I go. I'm going to wrap this around like so.
Really?
And make myself a little pocket right here. And then start stuffing it with the moss. Okay, cut the camera off and let me finish.
You can purchase that moss anywhere? Or
Yeah,
would it come
yeah.
out? Okay.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be moss. I mean, I've seen other videos of people that have used all kinds of material. You want to pack it in fairly tight. And remember that this thing has to stay moist until those roots form. So periodically go through and open them up and see if they're staying moist. You might have to add some more moisture throughout the year. If you do this in early spring, very early spring, you can expect to have roots by fall. If you don't, leave it alone, let it go through the winter time, and it'll get roots later on in the next spring.
So you must have to be sterile.
No, it's not sterile.
Right, so you carefully like cleaned your knife with alcohol, but then you put
Well, I guess the sphagnum moss is because they grow orchids in it.
They have properties too, the sphagnum moss. That's
It's
probably-
probably
Yeah.
like sterile-ish, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's definitely like more sterile than your clippers that you've been clipping out all the prune, like cleaning
Yeah.
out all the damaged and diseased wood.
Exactly. All right, so there you go. Now, if this branch is going to be out in the sunlight, what I like to do is I just like to cover it with a little bit of aluminum foil, because if you leave it out in the sunlight, it's it's gonna turn into an easy bake oven in there. So I just put a little bit of aluminum foil around it, and I am done.
And so Flora, I think Flora had a thought on the sterile.
Okay, so on orchids, I mean, we use at moss on orchids, but we pick it up with our hands. So it's obviously not sterile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other question I had is if you inadvertently cut around the base of a tree, circumnavigate, it kills the tree.
Yeah.
Why is it not killing?
Ta-da! There are some,
Yeah.
even though the vascular bundles are around there, there is some transmission that goes up through the root, deeper in than the cambium layer. And that's what keeps it alive. This is transpiring, so it's still gonna be bringing stuff up into it. But when you put it around the root, you don't have anything, this is keeping this alive. But if I were to girdle it down here, down at the bottom, I would have nothing that was keeping the plant alive. All of this would be gone.
I think the other thing too, right, is if you were to girdle a tree, which is what you're talking about, right, you cut around the base of the tree, that's a wide open wound.
Yeah.
You've actually done a lot of work to protect this wound and to give it just kind of a little bit of a chamber to allow it to still communicate at least slightly, right, to keep it moist and keep things going. And there's just enough left, like what you're saying, that it can still get through, as opposed to if you just did that cut and then left it open, at which point it would kill it.
Yeah. Yeah, if I didn't keep this protected, this branch would die.
So how do you keep it moist? I mean, or does it?
It's pretty well wrapped, and for the most part, it will stay moist like this because of the plastic, and I've got it pretty well wrapped. I will go back and periodically check it, because sometimes they do dry out, and if it dries out, I'm just gonna put more water in it. Yeah.
And the moss was wet.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yay!
And if it's a 95-degree day, you don't have aluminum foil on, or you leave that on?
I put this on if the branch is gonna be in the sunlight, if sun's gonna hit it. Yeah, if it's gonna be in the shade,
So
like
the
if it's
heat
in the back,
doesn't matter.
no, heat doesn't matter.
Oh,
Okay, so my favorite thing is cuttings, and one of the reasons why I like cuttings so much is that I can take one branch and I can get lots and lots of cuttings off of it. The disadvantage to cuttings is that you are severing this plant from its support system. So it takes a little more work and a little more equipment, but when you get good at it, it's wonderful.
Sarah, are you actually going to grow this, are you gonna leave that like that and grow a new root?
Yeah, when this is filled with roots, the ball will get filled with roots, cut it off, and then pot it up in a pot. Don't put this in the ground right away, because remember, I've got a root ball that's just this size, and I've got all of this to go. Now, when I separate this, I'm gonna cut some of this top growth off, just to give that root some support of doing that. Okay, where am I? Oh, cuttings, my favorite. I have a lot of favorites. Cuttings are also larger and more mature than seedlings, and they are physically less effort than division. Remember that any vegetative propagation keeps the maturity of the plant. I went out to Tony Avens. Does anybody know Plant Delights, Tony Avens? He had a small tree, and I looked at that tree and I said, that's an English ivy, but it's a tree. And I said, what is going on? So I asked Tony about it. He told me that English ivy has two stages. It has the junior immature stage, that's a vine, but when it gets up into the trees and gets all the light it needs, it goes into the second stage, which is a woody stage. So what he had to do is take a ladder all the way up to the top of the tree and take a cutting from the mature section of the English ivy to get that small little tree. And I thought that was really cool. I have not done that, but I thought it was cool.
Why would you want more information?
What?
she said, why would you want more English ivy?
I know, right? It's used with perennial plants. Cuttings are used with perennial plants, and And when to take it and what method to use depends on whether the plant is herbaceous or woody. Herbaceous perennials, you take cuttings anytime that they are actively growing. You can take tip, leaf, and section, and root cuttings, and they need very little, if any, rooting hormone. With woody perennials, they require rooting hormone in varying strengths depending on their growth stage. Now, when I say depending on their growth stage, I'm talking about softwood, semi-hardwood, and hardwood. And these usually occur in most plants with some exceptions. Softwood is in the springtime when they come out of dormancy and they just put out this new growth. That new growth is really pliable. It's this. You can see it's green, it's pliable, I can bend it, it won't break. That's softwood. And that's gonna take maybe no hormone or a very weak solution of hormone. Semi-hardwoods are around the summertime when the plant stops growing and starts putting on growth. And this is semi-hardwood. You can see I can still bend it. It's pliable, but it's not like this green stuff here. Then hardwood happens during dormancy, right before dormancy, but through dormancy. And this is when the plant is hardened off for the winter time. And that's this wood. I can't bend it. So this is hardwood. And you can see on just this plant there are softwood, semi-hardwood, and hardwood. So I hesitate to say that it is the season that determines the cuttings that you're going to make. It is mostly the root growth, but it occurs generally in those seasons. Now evergreens, well, you can get softwood cuttings off evergreens in the middle of the winter time. Does that make sense to people? Once you do your cuttings, this is, like I said, these cuttings are completely dependent on you. They are completely dependent for you to do the environment for them. So they do take a little more care. A couple of ways that they're going to need just basically the same thing that they're going to need basically the same thing as your seeds. They're going to need pots, they're going to need growing medium, they're going to need light, warmth, and moisture, and then they may or may not need rooting hormone. Again, the pots, you want the pots to hold a medium that is fairly deep. These pots, what are they, 4 inches? 4 to 6 inches of medium is what you're going to need for your cuttings. When you stick your cuttings, you don't want to stick them down to the bottom of the pot. You want them kind of in the middle of the pot. I didn't bring it with me, but one of the things that we use in the propagation team is we use one of these for our trays. And I fill them up to about here with our medium. And then we take another bigger dome and we put over the top of that, and that's our dome. With this one, I'm using the small cells, and I'm using this as the dome. This is a propagation dome.
And when you say watering from the bottom, are they sitting on pebbles or something like that?
No, they're just in the tray, yes.
So you want water literally in the tray?
Not with the cuttings. Now, moisture, and let me get to moisture. I'll get to moisture in the end of it. The growing medium, there are several different ways that you can do growing medium. I actually did some research on this because we had a class on it in our propagation team. And I'm happy to say that my formula is the one that was the most popular for home cutting trays. And that's 2 parts of perlite to 1 part of seed starting mix. And the reason why you use seed starting mix is because for one thing, it's sterile, it doesn't have any contaminants in it, and it's that right texture. It holds just enough moisture. The perlite is going to allow drainage of water so it doesn't get too wet, and it also provides structure, it just holds the cuttings up. That moisture is something, and this is where your moisture meter really comes in handy. With these clear trays, you can see if there's water pooling on the bottom, and then you know you need to do something really quick. But you don't necessarily see if it gets dry, so that moisture meter is really important. With these have holes in them and they will drain, so you can see if there's water in the tray. I kind of like these better. The more I use them, the more I like them. Your cuttings are going to have leaves on them unless they're hardwood cuttings. But even these, I took these as hardwood cuttings and you can see the leaves have come out. There's no roots on them yet. Those leaves have come out. That's the reason why you put the dome on them. And you will keep that dome on them as long as they are in that tray until they root.
The moisture meter, does it say like, is there like a percentage or?
No, it just says dry, wet.
Okay.
Yeah, and you want it right in the middle.
Right.
Yeah.
Alright.
Silly question, how do you know when they rooted? Yeah.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay, so with the moisture, that dome is extremely important, and every day I'll take this dome and I put my cuttings in here. You may get wet on this one. I'll try not to get you wet. I open the dome. I'm going to spritz my cuttings on the leaves, and then I'm going to spritz the inside of the dome. And then I'm going to put it back in. Come on, Bruiser. Like that.
And you would have this on a heat mat?
I will have this on the heat mat now. I don't do that during the summertime because summertime they don't need it. The reason why we have to keep the humidity as well as the soil moisture up is because those leaves have to photosynthesize. These plants are still alive, they still have to eat. They photosynthesize, but when they do that, they transpire, they pull moisture out. And if you don't keep that humidity up, they will transpire, and if they do, they're gonna die because they will dry themselves out. High humidity keeps them from transpiring and drying themselves out. Now I say that and then I think of Russian sage and lavender and all the other Mediterranean plants that will rot if you put them in high humidity. So that's the art of it. Let's see, where am I? Oh, light. Cuttings have to have light. Okay.
I was thinking of a little leaf from a jade plant.
Uh-huh.
Are you doing the same thing with that, like just sticking it in the soil?
I am, but with jades, there's a trick to that. And with jade, the leaf will give you lots and lots of roots, but unless you take a nick of the stem, you will not get another stem. So the trick with the jade plant is to take the leaf with a piece of the stem.
Oh, so okay, that's right, okay.
So is there a good source of this information other than having your email?
Yes, there is, and it's in the Master Gardener Handbook. It has a really good section on it. If you look up Dr. Michael, is it Michael Durr, D-I-R-R? He is the guru. He is where I get my information. You can get his book. Light with cuttings. Light is very important for these cuttings. Do not put this tray in the sunlight, please, because you will not have cuttings left. When I'm doing cuttings in the summertime, I have a big shady oak tree, and I put my cutting trays under those oak trees. That provides deep shade. They get just enough sunlight so they can still photosynthesize, but it doesn't burn them up. In the wintertime and springtime, I put them on my seed starting tray when there's no seeds on it, under the fluorescent lights, and they're very happy with that. That's where these guys have been. Let's see. Warmth. They do well with bottom heat while they're there. There's in the Duke Gardens, of course, we have this big elaborate system with automatic misting, but they do have certain trays that they keep on a heat mat, just because there are some plants that do better when they are on the heat mat. I have found that when I'm doing hardwood cuttings in the middle of the wintertime, the trick to hardwood cuttings is to get the roots to grow while keeping the tops dormant. So if you can put them outside, this is the ideal. Put them outside in a rooting tray that has some sort of a heat source on the bottom of it, like a coil or a heat coil, and so that the root zone stays warm while you keep them dormant. That way they can grow roots before they grow their leaves. Hardwood cuttings have no leaves, they're not transpiring, they don't need a humidity dome. and moisture. What was I gonna say about moisture? Can't remember.
The bottom water.
Oh, the bottom water. Moisture, as far as the soil is, the medium is concerned, use that moisture meter, or once you get good at it, you can use your finger. My finger does pretty well with moisture. Don't be fooled into thinking that every day when you go out there and spritz those leaves, that you're putting enough moisture into that medium to keep it from drying out. That was the number one trick that killed a lot of our cuttings when I first started this, is that I was, testing the moisture, and it seemed like it was moist fine in the top, bone dry on the bottom where the roots were starting to form. Did you do that?
And I,
Yeah. Did you find that you got it dry in the bottom, thinking that it was moist on the top? No? Okay.
I didn't do it.
All right, so we can do cuttings, like I said, we can do cuttings from the stem, we can do cuttings from leaves, and we can do cuttings from roots. So I'm just gonna do a little demo on a stem cutting. And I will hold this up for you. Come here, my beauty. I am going to do a tip cutting of this nice green pliable softwood cutting. Don't scare me. And then I'm going to do a semi-hardwood cutting. So, I have this stem. Here it is. It's about 4 inches long. That's a good one. The goal is to have 2 of the nodes below the medium and 2 of the nodes above the medium. That rarely happens. So, must have 1 node below and 1 node above. Ideally, 2 below, 2 above. The first thing that you're going to do is decide where you're going to make your cutting. And I want this to be softwood cutting, so I'm going to cut it right there. You can see where the green starts. And I'm going to do a diagonal cut right below the bud. Now the reason why I do a diagonal cut, number 1, is that I'm exposing more of the cambium layer with a diagonal cut. Number 2, it's a good practice to get into to do that diagonal cut on the bottom, because I will guarantee you, if you put this cutting in like this, you will not get any roots. That is absolutely across the board a law. The next thing I'm going to do, I don't want this little seedling, like I said, is going to dry out. So I do not want it to transpire as much as possible. So I'm going to take all of these leaves off. Now, when I take them off, if you notice, what I'm doing is I'm pinching it with my fingernail. I'm cutting and I'm pulling forward toward the tip of the branch. Don't pull your leaves off going down, because you will rip the stem. You will do more damage to that stem. So pinch, and if they don't come off, you can pull, but pull toward the tip. I have to leave some leaves on the top because they are going to photosynthesize, but all I want are 2. So I'm going to take this one off. And if they're big leaves, if you have big leaves, cut them in half. This is about the size that you want. If they have any flowers, they're really cute when they have flowers. Take them off. Take them off. You don't want them to do anything but put energy into growing a root. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my razor blade. Even though I cut it at a stem with my pruners, when you cut with a pruner, you might damage that cambium layer. Use a new sharp razor blade and redo that cut. But make sure that you do it just below a node. Remember, we're using intercalary meristems right here. So I'm just going to clean that cut up a little bit, like that. And then what I like to do, and not everybody does this, and everybody has a different way. I like to go up about a half an inch and give it another, just a tiny little scraping. That just kind of ensures that it has 2 places that it can root. I'm going to take it, and then my powder, I'm going to roll it around in the powder. And then once I have it all rolled around the powder, I'm going to knock it off, like that. If it has too much powder, it'll form a callus, and you'll never get roots out of it. So Just knock the powder off, so it's just like that. And that's my cutting. That's a tip cutting. That's what's called tip cutting. It will go into the rooting tray. Where's my poker? A very important tool to have if you are a propagator is a poker. And I can't find mine. So I'm going to use this. Oh, maybe it's in my pocket. Ah, poker. Take it, poke a hole so that you don't knock off the rooting hormone, and you want the hole to go halfway down, not all the way down.
Where do you get sterile chopsticks?
Soak them in alcohol. Very good. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's called an internodal. So let's say I use this and I got all kinds of really nice tip cuttings, but I want more, you know, because we always want more. We can make one out of this. It's called a section cutting or an internodal cutting, and I'm looking at it and I see this is going to be my top node, and there's another one there, so that's good. That's 2. I'm going down, let's see, 1, 2, there's one here, there's one here. I'm going to use this one as the bottom one, so I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut it there, and then I will take my razor blade and I will cut right below that stem, that leaf. Pull the leaf off. Now this has a whole lot of leaves on it, so I've got to take some of those leaves off. And I'm going to take the bigger leaves off, and I'm going to take these leaves off, and I'm going to take that leaf off, and there's my 2 leaves. Now this one has a semi-hardwood, so it really does need to have another wound on it. I'm going to wound right there, just so I expose that, and then I'm going to turn it all the way around, and I'm going to go a little bit higher up, and I'm going to give another wound.
Are you trying to place that in any specific place near a node, or?
No, that for these side wounds, you don't have to do that because you're going after the lateral. This one's an intercalary meristematic tissue. These wounds on the sides are lateral tissues. Roll it around in my rooting hormone, tap, 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 and it's ready to be stuck with my sterile chopstick. And into the ground it goes. Give it a good spray, and you're ready to go. That's it. Now, leaf cuttings are something that you do. If you want a good example of leaf cuttings, go into Panna's office. I mean, she is absolutely great at African violets. I, on the other hand, have never been successful with African violets. Okay, I have my weakness, which is houseplants. With an African violet, a lot of times, it is one of the leaves where you have to leave the petiole on the leaf, and you stick it all the way up to the petiole. Another way that you can do a leaf cutting is like the great big giant Rex begonias, the great big fancy begonias. You can take that leaf and you can lay it down flat on the medium, pin it down, and then cut the veins. And each place where you cut the vein will create a new plant. So they're pretty versatile. Then let's see, my favorite root cuttings. We did root cuttings the first year that we started the propagation team, and after we were out there on our bellies under the trees trying to dig roots up, we decided that was something we could forego. Root cuttings are really different. Let me see, get my notes here.
Mind if we grab you about root cuttings if we're interested?
Do what? Is it time?
Yeah.
Okay. So root cuttings, there's 3 different types. There's fibrous roots that are just laid on the surface and covered over. Then there are roots that are a little bit like off of begonias and dahlias. They go not horizontally, vertically into the ground, and leave them about 1/4 of an inch. The top part of the root is the top part of the root that is next to the plant. Bigger roots like sassafras roots and small trees, you're gonna do the same thing. It's going in vertically, but you want to bury the top part of the root about an inch or a half an inch in under the surface of the thing. And that is all that I have. I know.